Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats with GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and we're doing a series at the moment, a 20-part series on using the Leftovers Pantry. So we're talking fabric leftovers. So what I've got here is a pantry that we've set up. So we've kind of seen all this. We're on to part 9 out of the 20. So this is my pantry. I've labelled all my drawers. I've got strips, squares and rectangles and things in the drawer according to the size on the label. And today we're going to have some fun making another unit. So we've been making some units using our pantry, and this time we're up to unit number 5, and what we're making is this. It's a flying geese unit, or as we only make one at a time, I like to call it a flying goose, because it's only geese when there's more than one. So as you can see, I've made lots of different sizes here. I just went through the pantry and made them from the different size strips in there. And if you're interested, there's some notes and things that are available for download from GourmetQuilter.com. And I'm also going to suggest that you keep a sample of your unit, as we've been doing over the last few parts with the units that we're making. So we'll go ahead and we'll just get these flying geese done. So a flying geese really is just simply a rectangle with 2 corners of a different fabric. So I've gone ahead and made all these different sizes, and I've left this larger one here. So I've still got most of my rectangle, it came out there as well, but I've done one corner here. So what we need to have is the squares that we're going to put squares on to make those corners, and they need to be the same width as the rectangle, but it's not just double the length. So this is a 6.5 inch square, this is a 6.5 inch wide rectangle. However, it doesn't want to be 13 inches long. You've got to take off ½ an inch so that you can have a little overlap here. And we need an overlap here because when we sew it into something, we need that 1/4 inch seam allowance there so that we get a nice point at the seam. So it's the same amount less ½ an inch of this doubled, or it's using the finished size plus ½ an inch, whichever way you want to look at it. Now I've probably confused you. I'm sure you know how to make flying geese corners. So I just wanted to go through this one here because what we're going to do is draw a line on there, or mark it in some way so that we can find right on the diagonal. We want to stitch the diagonal line, so make it so that you can see it, and then you want to draw another line ½ an inch away from that diagonal line. So on most rulers there's a line in at ½ inch at a ½ inch point, so you can lay the ½ inch marking line right through the diagonal points there, so that will cover the line that you've just drawn. And it's probably not easy for you to see on this colour fabric. It's not easy for me to see on this colour fabric. However, I have now got 2 lines ½ an inch apart. What we're going to do is position it on here and stitch on both lines and cut between the 2 so that we can save the corners. That's the reason for the second line of sewing. So I've got it so that the diagonal line is the one nearest the goose, and then the one that comes along the sides a bit that we're going to cut away the corner is towards the corner. So the corner part is smaller than this half here. But there's other ways of making flying geese, but this one, when we're using leftovers, is a particularly straightforward way, I feel. So what we often are tempted now to start sewing at a corner. I find that starting on a corner sometimes can be a little bit tricky. So I would most likely sew it from this end so that we're kind of coming in onto a fabric rather than at a little corner that just could consider getting trumped in our machine. We hope it wouldn't, but just sometimes it does. So I'm just going to come in. I like to come in on that flat edge, but at the point still, but there's just a little bit more for the machine to get started on when you come in that way. And you just want to make sure that it's coming through to the point at this end. You've got your lines to sew on. Just be careful, we are sewing on the bias, and even though it's still in a square, it may want to stretch. So just be aware of that. Don't let it stretch. You want it just to feed through nicely right on that stitching line. It possibly feels a little uncomfortable because most of our fabric doing it this way is inside this little space here. To do the second line, you can turn it round because again you're coming in on a sort of flat edge rather than on a point. And now we just want to sew on that second line that we drew. So this is a great way so that we actually get 2 pieces out of this that we can use, but for the flying geese we don't need the corner, but it can be used in something else. So I've got my 2 lines of sewing there, point to point, and then 1/2 inch away. It overlaps up the top here, and we need it to do that because we'll need that to be in the seam allowance area. So now I'm just going to cut between the 2 sewing lines, which should leave us a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both pieces. And now we can press them. I find I like it best when I press the seam into the corner. So we'll do that. And then this piece here, we don't actually need this at the moment. You can press it now, you can save it for a little task to do later because we're not using them at the moment. But we've ended up with a very nice 1/2 square triangle unit there as well that can be trimmed and go in with our other 1/2 squares. If I'm making a whole lot of these sort of corners on things, I tend to put them to one side, and they can go in my pantry as well. I've got a whole lot here from making all these geese. And I have a special little jar that I keep things like that in, ready for when I want to go back and trim them up to use them. So that's part of my pantry as well, with things still waiting to happen to them. So there's the large size goose. So I'm suggesting that if you're making up some of these units, that you make several in different sizes. They don't have to be from every size necessarily, and you can make several of the same size. You might have a size you're most comfortable with, you might have a size you've got the most leftovers of, whatever it is. I suggest that you make some so that we can have a little play at some stage shortly in the future. So that was the Leftovers Pantry Part 9. I will see you again with Part 10.